Hi to my EN 101 class. Last night was our first ever campfire Q&A session. Attendance wasn't great, I'll be honest, but that's okay. They're not mandatory. What I wanted to do was take that and combine it with some questions I'm getting from my 4 EN 100 classes and just put a little something together to anticipate some problems that I already can tell a few of you are having. Some of you feel a little adrift. In particular, some of you are antsy about the vocab. So let me just throw this together so you have a little bit of a better sense of where we're going with the class. Right now for this mini lesson, I'm going to revisit the grab bag assignments because I can tell some of you are unclear of the function and role of that in your overall grade. I'm going to give you a full vocab roundup. Honestly, I was hoping originally you're going through the lessons and getting context clues and kind of building your own sophisticated understandings of the vocab. That's too squishy. We need to do something more concrete. So by the end of this little mini session, I want to give you a flashcard definition. By that I just mean a simple definition that would get you there on a multiple choice quiz, and then we'll build and add to those definitions over time. And then finally the A demographic. I'm already feeling 3 groups of you form out of 125 students. I can roughly break you into thirds, and I just want to make a case for which group you might be in and if you're okay with that, so you can make adjustments as necessary. I actually literally have a yardstick with me, so we know this is serious. Let's get into it. This is ridiculous. I'm not using that. All right, first of all, grab bag re-explained. Let me try to make a case for the grab bag assignments. First of all, they're going to be up by Monday, worst case scenario. I may have a few sprinkled in by the weekend, but don't worry, it's not that you should have been working on them. I was planning on putting them out Monday, but enough of you have asked, so I might try to get at least a few out a little bit sooner. 3 tiers. Think of this as a 3-tiered system. So there's going to be ultimately something like 20 to 30 to choose from, 20 to 30 separate assignments. And if you're going for the C, you only have to do 5 of these throughout the semester. And frankly, you're going to pick the easiest ones. And why wouldn't you? You're going for the C, so bare minimum might be part of your kind of plan for the course. That's okay. If you're going for the B, you have to do 10. So by definition, you may have to reach into some of the more difficult assignments because they do range quite a bit in terms of difficulty and length, like the scope of the assignment. If you're shooting for the A, you are going into the Navy SEAL level of writing, you'll have to do 15. And again, by design, some of those final 5 to get your full 15 will be some of the more challenging ones. You'll just have to kind of decide which ones seem like they're going to help with your essays or which ones just seem like they might fit your personality. Somebody in another class thinks of these as extra credit. No, they're essential credits. So if you're contracting for the C, you have to do 5 and get above a certain threshold in terms of quality to get the C. So you're losing points if you don't do up to that maximum, or up to that minimum, excuse me. So make sure you're aware that these aren't extra credit, these are part of the overall grade. So wherever you're going to grade contract, whatever level, whatever tier you're going for, make sure you're aware of those as an essential part of your overall grade as opposed to extra points. We'll talk about extra credit when we get about halfway through the semester. Next, I just want to hit every single vocab term with at least one simple definition. And I might add 2 vocab terms that are forward-looking so you have some advanced notice of where we're going. If you had me for EN 100, I apologize. You're literally going to get the exact same definitions, but you'll also see some familiar quiz questions, so that'll work out to your advantage. So here we go. First, and I say most important term for this class is text. Think of it as only needing to meet 2 attributes. You only need 2 criteria for something to be a text. It has to be made by humans. I said man-made originally. I'm trying to boost my political correctness quotient. It has to be made by humans, and it has to communicate an idea. A way to strip that down is you could say if it's made by humans, it probably communicates an idea already. So pretty much the first part, if it's made by humans, a human being constructed the thing, then it definitely qualifies as a text. That's separate from narrative, and I'll come back to that, but text is the biggest umbrella. It covers anything created by humans, And part of the point of the course is learning how to read a variety of different kinds of texts. Not just the written word, not just visual arts and things like that, but being able to read between the lines on any number of texts outside the class as well. That's part of my course rationalization. You're not getting good at reading Shakespeare, you're using Shakespeare to get good at reading tax law or figuring out that ambiguous text that your crush sent you at 2 o'clock in the morning. In other words, the texts in this class are the workout gym, and then those strengths should be applied to texts totally unrelated to this class. All right, narrative. Normally I'd want to spend way more time on this with the implications, but again, a simple flashcard definition: a story with a point, or a story with an objective. This includes things like grandma whisks you out to the porch to do some porch setting with some tea and to reminisce about her childhood. You know, the childhood where everybody respected their elders and weren't on their smartphones all the time and actually communicated to each other and had values and morals. That would qualify as a narrative because it's a story, and I'd say it has 2 objectives. It has 2 points. One is nostalgia. She feels good looking back to the past, a better time. And second objective is probably guilt. She's trying to make you feel bad about not being part of that treasured generation that she came from. So anytime you tell a story to your friends to get a laugh or to make them feel guilty or to cheer somebody up, all those would qualify as narrative. Politics is almost completely narrative. So some of you have like politics fatigue right now. You know the election's coming up. One of the reasons you might have fatigue is you can't trust most of the narratives in politics. They are designed to only have one objective: to glean votes or to make money. And so what that means is you're kind of sick of all those intersecting and conflicting narratives. But keep in mind, all politics is all narratives all the time. Advertising. Any advertisement that uses a story or a little scenario, from a Geico commercial to the Budweiser puppy getting lost in the woods and almost getting eaten by wolves until the horses came to save him, all of those would qualify as narrative. There, it's a narrative with the objective of persuading you to buy something or to buy a service. So narrative is all around us. It's a subdivision of text. So all narrative is definitely text, but all text does not necessarily tell a story. So it's one umbrella term smaller, though still pretty far-reaching and pretty broad. Next, we got the metacognitive approach. I can tell I have been too vague. I haven't really done you justice in terms of describing this term and how we're using it in this class. So maybe add, wherever you're taking notes for the official quiz terms, add something like the metacognitive approach to writing. Because you can use the metacognitive approach in any number of settings. You can use it in your own life to think about your own habits. I get very angry, bordering on levels of fury and mania when I get done with department meetings or Senate meetings here at the college. And I just know I can't keep donuts in the house because I get home, I have that level of anger, and then I stress eat, and 12 donuts have disappeared. It took me a while to figure that out, though. I didn't notice, because I hadn't thought about my own thinking, that there was a correlation between being extremely angry and frustrated and the disappearance of 12 donuts. I pause, I step back, I try to think about my own thinking, I try to make connections more objectively, and then I make a better decision about my own habits. So you can use the metacognitive approach in your life, thinking about your own behaviors when you're on autopilot, stepping back, trying to be objective, and then adjusting your own habits or behavior. But I have not communicated how we're using this in writing. So let me give you an example of how you don't just use the metacognitive approach to create better study habits, you also use it in the actual writing. The essays themselves should have a metacognitive moment. So let's say, hypothetically, you have some really strong emotional reactions to things going on in politics today. Let's take the protests or rioting, and we'll talk about why those two terms are so loaded such as they are. The news narratives are completely different whether or not you call them protesters or you call them rioters. So that's a good example of narrative in action. But let's say you feel really strongly about that. Could be very strongly in support of the protest, or it could be a really strong emotional reaction against the rioters. And it probably depends on which word you use. In your writing, you want to maintain your actual opinion. You don't want to get rid of your opinion. I don't believe in third-person essays unless you're, writing a textbook or a newspaper article where you need a third-person objective voice. But you also can't let your emotions do the writing. So if you have a knee-jerk reaction to a current event, you feel very angry about that, The metacognitive approach comes in when you step back and you say, well, I wonder why I feel so angry, or I wonder why I reacted so strongly to that situation. From that stance, you might have a better shot at creating an objective, logical argument. You're still maintaining your point of view, but you're also adding some analysis. You're more nuanced. You're never going to win an argument or persuade somebody just by being louder or being having more volume than them in terms of your emotional convictions. The way to win those arguments is to step out of the emotions first, reorganize your argument, make sure it's cleaned up, nuanced, and organized, and you step back in to a persuasive context or an argument, or you're writing a persuasive essay to prove a political point. The metacognitive approach should allow you some distance so you can formulate better writing. So that's really how I'm using it in the class. You can use it in your own study habits to try to make better decisions for yourself, but you want to use it in your logic so you're not letting emotions take over, you're actually thinking rather than feeling. Okay, let me try to make a case for why I'm making the attention economy an official vocab term, and let me try to explain how I'm applying it to the class. This isn't my term. I'm kind of using the metacognitive approach a little differently for this class, so you could say we need to know Vogt's definition of that term. This you can look up on Google and you'll get the correct definition. The shortest way to describe it might be saying something like, your attention or your number of seconds on screen is literally somebody else's currency. Here's what I mean by that. The people who are in charge of most social media companies, so the apps on your phone, the really addictive ones like Facebook, Instagram, anything involving snap streaks, whatever that is, those are actually being engineered to be maximally addictive. Somebody's making $500,000 a year right now who got hired from like a Harvard psychology department to design your smartphone to be as much like a slot machine as possible. So I'm not being cute like, oh, you might have a problem. I mean, you might be clinically addicted, like the DSM-5 definition of addiction. Some of you, including me, may have that kind of a toxic relationship with your phone, and that's by design. They are literally keeping track of how many seconds you spend on any given website, and those seconds get transferred into actual money. In other words, the more seconds you spend on site, it's called, the more advertising revenue they can pull in. So they're cynically projecting something like, good, the longer we can keep so-and-so in bed scrolling through their phone, the more money we make. And you just have to be aware of that. Use the metacognitive approach to be aware of the fact that you might be in a toxic relationship with the AI robot in your pocket. And I'm not talking about spending like an hour on Spotify. That's probably good for you, like listening to music, limited engagement with friends in kind of a real world scenario. There's lots of aspects of your smartphone that are good for you, but if you spend 6 hours on a social media site and you feel kind of gross afterwards, you feel kind of icky about the number of hours you just spent, basically you have given that time, therefore money, back into the attention economy. Like 10 or 15 years ago, I used to talk about the smartphone policy in class with a level of frustration and anger. You kids these days in this generation with no self-control, no ability to manage your own emotions. And I started to settle down when I did enough research to figure out, yeah, they're hiring people from Vegas to make your smartphone maximally addictive. So in a way, it's really not your fault. You want to be aware of it, but it's not your fault if you are in a toxic addictive relationship with your phone. For those of you who felt like, this is a little preachy, still feels like an old guy telling me I have a problem with technology, let me try to put it into a formula so you entrepreneurs, those of you who want to grow up and start a business and make lots and lots of money, try to conceptualize it literally as an algorithm. Do you agree with premise A that time is money? Just think that to yourself right now. I'm making the statement that time is money. Do you agree or disagree? Premise 2, would you agree that money equals power? So if you agreed with premise A, that time equals money, and that premise B is money equals power, you're also basically agreeing that time equals power. The minutes of your day are the currency that you could use to either push yourself in one direction or not push yourself, or even pull you away from what your stated goals are. Finally, if you agree with premise A, premise B, premise C is power equals strength. So power in this context is stamina, strength, and likelihood of success. Think to yourself if you agree with those three premises. If I can get you on time equals money, money equals power, power equals strength and likelihood of success, then you must acknowledge that you're in an arms race with your smartphone. Your smartphone doesn't want you to fail, but it rewards you for maximally addictive behavior. It's not evil, it's just like having a box of donuts and a full bottle of Jack Daniels and a stack of porn magazines next to your nightstand when you wake up in the morning. That'll be a fun morning, but not necessarily conducive to strength, power, and stamina. So think of your attention span as physical stamina. You're trying to work out your attention span, so you want to try to cultivate as healthy a relationship as you can with your technology. He said delivering a course to a camera that you're going to probably be watching on your smartphone. Believe me, the irony of me teaching this lesson online does not escape me. 2 more vocab terms. These are kind of advanced notice for the next week or two. Again, fresh and completely ripped out of the EN 100. So you'll know all of this already and you'll have a better sense of where I'm going. This one hurts me because normally I would spend at least a class on each term. So I'm going to do like 3 minutes on concrete, and it's going to be physically painful because of all the stuff I want to say, talk about, or get you to talk to me about in the discussion. But here it goes, the simplest version that I can physically manage of concrete. For now, if something is concrete, it just means it exists in the real world. I can't help it. I have to put quotes around real world, because how do we know we're not in the Matrix right now, or there's such a thing as facts? What if we're living in a simulation? But let's assume there is such a thing as real world. So if it exists in the real world, how do you know? You engage it with your 5 senses. So if you can touch it, taste it, engage with it physically, you can hear what it sounds like and see what it looks like, then that is likely to be a concrete object or a concrete thing, concrete noun. Why is that important? Only in reference to its opposite. In writing, you want to be concrete and you want to deliberately utilize nuanced specificity. A couple examples of things that are concrete. Concrete block. If it helps you remember the mnemonic, if you drop a concrete block on your toe, it's not a matter of whether or not you think your toe's broken. Your toe is definitely a bloody, mashed up pulp, and that's not necessarily a perspective. That's just concrete reality. So anything you can experience with the 5 senses outside in the real world, we're going to call concrete. And it's more important if you understand it in opposition to its mirror opposite, which I'm going to call abstract. If you want to try to maintain the symmetry of the definition, concrete exists in the real world, so the opposite of that would be abstract is something that exists in the mind or in concept only. So examples of things that are abstract, any feeling ever. So love, embarrassment, hatred, emotional numbness, all of those would be qualified as abstract ideas. Also gets you concepts like democracy. Democracy isn't really a feeling. Patriotism is a feeling, but democracy is a concept, but it is still conceptual. It doesn't exist in the real world in a concrete way. Just enough people agree. We like the founding documents. We all agree that we live in a democracy, and hopefully we get to continue to live in one where every voice is heard. What about something like freedom? You may counter-argue, well, I'm locked in a prison cell, vote. I don't feel like that is a concept. I feel like the concrete walls of the prison cell are very real, so shouldn't freedom be something that's concrete? My counter-argument to that is, here I am locked in a jail cell with no smartphone and nobody pestering me with emails. I'm finally free to write my novel. Or you could do a similar game like, here I am safe, protected from all the people, all the crazy people on the outside, and I'm finally free from all the anxieties I had out in the world before I was institutionalized. In other words, freedom is a concept. If you can play that game of it's really in the eye of the beholder or the perspective of the person experiencing the feeling or the concept. So something like freedom also qualifies as abstract. In terms of your first essay, just like in EN 100, I'm very interested in watching you navigate abstract concepts, which tend to be more general, more open-ended, and making sure you're immediately supporting them with something more concrete, more physical, more real-world oriented. So in terms of the first essay, I'll go into a lot more detail about how you're using concrete versus abstract, as long as you're aware that, like EN 100, they're pretty foundational to how I'm going to start talking about the abstraction loop when we get to it. And finally, just want to close out by talking about the three groups I feel you kind of pulling yourselves into, with particular attention to the group that many of you probably want to be in, the A group, the A demographic. So here's what I'm realizing is happening as I kind of get a better sense of who's where in the course. One group of you, about a third, I haven't heard from, so you should email me, get in touch with me any minute now. If you want to pass the course, at least send an email like, hey, I'm here and I'm alive. That's a pretty large chunk, an entire third of you that haven't engaged at all yet, so get on that. If you're watching this, though, you're probably close. It means you at least got to Blackboard. Write me an email, say hello, ask about the first week of class. Second group, if we're thinking kind of the triage mode, you're fine. You've sent me a grade contract. Maybe you already did one of the homeworks. You're aware of the message board, the discussion board. So you're kind of fine. You're sitting pretty. You're on a trajectory to do fine, either a B or C in the class. So I'm not too worried about that group. That group seems like they're on autopilot and will take care of themselves. And then we've got almost a third, which is actually a larger than average group of obvious A candidates. Not only did you say A in your contract, but you're behaving like an A student. And I just wanted to end with what the behavior of a typical A student at this stage looks like. And if you're in the B or C range and you want to try to edge up, here's what I've seen, and I can describe these as patterns. Lots of emails. You haven't just sent me one email, but you've asked some questions, you've already engaged, maybe you've showed me the homework and said, don't grade this yet, I just wanted to make sure it's okay. That's a clear indicator of somebody who's probably headed towards an A situation. Again, the check-ins are, the campfires are not mandatory, but if you've already had a couple check-ins, that's a good sign. Next thing I'm noticing is number of engagements per week, like the number of emails sent, number of times logged onto Blackboard. Of course, that's an eat your vegetables kind of moment. The people who are engaging more are more likely to do better in the class. So that should be pretty obvious. Third attribute that I'm noticing is an ability to try to take notes, not just for the quiz, but for the larger arc of the class. So what I might say, a typical difference between a B student and an A student. B student writes decent essays, takes good enough notes so you can ace the quizzes, and does fine. The A students are actually trying to connect units and are more interested in where I'm going as a journey. So don't think of the lessons in isolation. Try to take notes in a way where you see why I'm putting units where I'm putting them. I have answers to all those questions, so you could email me and say, hey, why are we doing this essay in this order? Vote. Totally fair game to do that. I'll be as transparent as you want me to, but keep in mind the students who get A's sense the course as a longer journey. Where at the beginning of that journey now, they are keeping track enough to kind of know conceptually why we're talking about the topics we're talking about, and when the objective, the end of the semester, is finally within view, that last essay will be much richer if you understand why I've ordered the course that I have. In other words, you've taken notes to try to trace the journey of the course and why we're approaching the topics that we're approaching. I think that's it. That's all I had for today. Always email me with questions. Make sure you're keeping in touch with me. The email exchange, again, is the easiest way to get the instructor check-ins. All right, I'm out. Peace, be well, take care, and see you next round.